What is it that frightens us? I must admit, I've always wondered. What could compel me to stay up all night, reading horror stories to the point that I wake in a cold sweat, fearful of the bony, pale hand reaching out through the darkness, clutching at me, clutching at my very essence?
The documentary is about internet horror stories.
Okay.
And the way that horror stories kind of change. I see them on the internet in that they all seem to be more so than I think in traditional media, interconnected by recurring themes.
Okay.
So some of my questions, I'm going to ask you questions first from a questionnaire that I got an admin to put up on a Creepypasta website. Do you know what creepypastas are?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, they're basically it's based off the term copypasta, which is just a silly version of a story that's copied and pasted on multiple forms. A creepypasta is just a copypasta that is scary. It's just a spooky internet story. Do you know about Slendermans?
No.
Don't know Slenderman? Okay.
No. I know the term, but I think I know the term. But no, I don't know about it.
Okay, that's good. You're lucky then.
But we are not so lucky. The Slender Man is a fictional being created on the Something Awful forums by user Victor Surge as part of a contest to insert mythical creatures into photographs. The original images, featuring a being resembling an unusually tall, thin man with a featureless face in a black suit, were accompanied by tiny snippets of text, apparently taken from archival documents concerning the events surrounding them. This tiny bit of additional mythology gave the Slender Man the launch pad it needed to rise to the status of urban myth, despite clearly having documented fictional roots. This rise was aided by content created by other internet users. The most outstanding of these is the Marble Hornets video series, featured on YouTube. Marble Hornets helped to establish much of the currently accepted Slenderman lore, including the creature's patterns of stalking its victims in increasingly intrusive ways, its interference with nearby digital devices, and its targeting of people investigating it. Marble Hornets, and the Slenderman mythos in general, are exemplary of the extremely common internet horror tropes and story structures. In these stories, there are two primary parties. The searching party, our protagonists, and the afflicted party, who has become aware of some sort of supernatural being or knowledge. This awareness, or the consequences of it, eventually drive the afflicted party into some degree of madness. Through the investigations that the searching party carries out, they too become aware of the maddening supernatural and become themselves an afflicted party.
One thing that we have to separate out is Gothic and horror. They're very much interrelated species, if you will. The Gothic relies very heavily on the uncanny, on the notion that something that you are familiar with has suddenly become unfamiliar and threatening.
Many online stories engage with the Gothic and the uncanny. There is an entire subgenre of stories about haunted or altered video games, including the stories about the Lavender Town Syndrome, which claims that the original Pokemon games included frequencies that induced suicidal thoughts in children, and the Ben Drowned series, which tells of a copy of a Zelda game haunted by a malevolent spirit. These stories induce fear by preying on familiar and comfortable memories that the main demographic for the stories possess. Assuming that the average reader of an online horror story falls into the 18 to 30 age bracket, they almost certainly played these games as children. By taking these fond memories and transposing them into the realm of terror, these stories strike a deep and personal chord, achieving a level of unnerving discomfort not found in a typical horror blockbuster.
Oh. Whoa. Whoa. Whoa, I don't like that. Oh, this one's even farther.
It makes you work for it. Work it.
I don't want to do it.
Do it. What else are you supposed to do?
Oh.
Horror tends to go for shock.
Oh.
Horror is about violation, about the abject, that which is completely othered to us. So abject things are things like corpses or grossly wounded bodies. And of course these things can function as the uncanny too. The walking corpse, like a zombie, is an uncanny human. But it's also relying on something that makes us reject that which we're seeing.
Many stories on the internet, since they are free from censorship or marketing committees, indulge the reader in horrific gore and explicit descriptions of bodily violence. One of the most outstanding of these is a story called Russian Sleep Experiment. The story focuses on a group of scientists testing an experimental stimulant gas on prisoners. Over the course of several sleepless days, the prisoners kill themselves at their chambers and block all the windows in their cells with pages torn from books and their own feces. When the cells are reopened, the prisoners have removed massive chunks of their skin in order to expose and remove their own organs, arranging them on the floor. The prisoners fight to stay awake. The surgeries attempting to save what is left of them eventually killed them. When one of the researchers asks the only surviving test subject at gunpoint what he is, he responds, "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread."
From a psychoanalytic perspective or a psychological perspective, what it's doing is reminding us of a horror that we've repressed. The psychoanalytic term, the Freudian term for it, is the return of the repressed. In other words, we didn't know we were horrified by it until we see it in front of us. It is reminding us of a horror that we have forced ourselves to forget.
Indeed, many of these stories engage with the reawakening of a forgotten or repressed fear. Many more make use of existing fears that play into elements of the uncanny, such as Slender Man's featureless face in strange proportions, or the pale, stretched skin of a creature called the Rake. However, the fears most usually picked up on by horror stories on the internet are not specific repressions relating to individuals or cultural groups, but to the human race as a whole, the universal.
Horror can also remind us of the daily horror of our society. There are lots of readings that it can remind us of, say, the horrors of capitalism, the human body become an object. And in that case, what it's doing is, again, it's still doing something similar. It's reminding us of something that we see every day but aren't horrified by, but we should be.
The great terror of the Russian sleep experiment, therefore, is not just the horrific gore of the mutilated human body, but the idea that we are universally haunted and connected by the same terror and monstrosity. The terror behind the Slender Man is that any individual or group seeking or researching him will become its next victim. These stories don't just remind us of primordial fears of unusual creatures, but the postmodern terror of the digital internet age. It is the terror that we see every day, but aren't horrified by, but should be. The knowledge that
no matter where you are, everyone is always connected.
And this brings us back to the archetype of the searching party and the afflicted party. In a reality where we are all connected by the same digital, spiritual, and supernatural bonds, there is, theoretically, no division between the reality within the story and the reality of the reader. In effect, when learning about these supernatural horrors, we are the searching party. The characters in the story on our screens are the afflicted party, and implicitly, there will come a time when we will become aware of the maddening supernatural. And we, just as the characters have, will become afflicted with this horrible fear.